My name is Nehemiah and this is my story. This is the story of how I, a simple cupbearer, became a man of great influence and restored the city of Jerusalem. It is important to understand that I am a man far from home. Many years ago, my people were captured and exiled from Israel for years. My people sinned against God and did not repent when He rebuked us. Our exile came at the hand of King Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. He invaded Israel 3 times, capturing and taking people with him each time. Our exile should not have been a surprise since the prophet Jeremiah said this would happen, last 70 years, and then the people could return to Israel. Years passed and King Nebuchadnezzar died, but we are still captives. King Artaxerxes of Persia now rules. Now I am a humble cupbearer to the king. Due to my responsibilities, I lived in Susa, the capital of Persia, and I lived in the citadel, that is, in the fortified palace of the Persians. My body was in Persia, but my heart and interest were in Jerusalem, 800 miles away. I was interested to hear from those who returned about how the town and city were doing. People may think that a man like me has more important things to do than think about a distant place, where I have never been, and about people with whom I was strange. However, because my heart was on the things of God, my heart was no longer for myself, but for others. He had a burden for the remnant of Judah. Although I had not experienced their suffering, I identified with them. One day, one of my brothers came from Judah with some other men and I asked them about the Jewish remnant that survived the exile in Jerusalem. They said those who managed to return to the area after exile are in a lot of trouble and shame. The wall around Jerusalem is broken, and it I immediately did what I knew I could do, pray and intensely seek God in this situation. He knew exactly who he was fasting and praying to. There are many gods that people believe in, but only the God of heaven can satisfy my needs. I prayed to God about my pain and stress and left it there. You see, as the king's cupbearer, it was my job to bring him wine and taste it. The king's cupbearer is a significant position in any royal court. The cupbearer tasted the wine and food before the king so that no one could poison him. The cupbearer had to be a man in whom the king could place great trust. The cupbearer had to be a man of faithful and impressive character in whom the king could place a tremendous amount of trust. If the cupbearer could be turned against the king, it would be easy to kill him. It was natural that the cupbearer was frequently consulted on different questions that appeared before the king. After praying and waiting for 4 months, I finally got an answer. The day came when everything would change for me and my people. My face was sad as I mourned for Jerusalem. This was the first time the king saw me sad, so he asked me, "Why does your face look so sad when you are not sick?" This can only be sadness from the heart. In the king's court, being sad was against the rules. That was true in many royal courts. The idea was that the king was such a great person that just being around him would make you forget all your problems. The king might have thought he was being seriously insulted when he looked sad. When the king said, "This can only be sadness of heart," I knew that the king had noticed my sadness and was taking it seriously. The king's next words could easily have been, "Cut off his head." I was very scared, but I told the king the honest truth, "May the king live forever." Why shouldn't my face look sad when the city where my ancestors are buried is in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire? The king said to me, "What do you want?" He was petrified because he knew he was going to the king to ask for something significant. Much depended on what would happen in answer to that question. This could change everything. I understood that it was not my place to change the king's heart. I prayed and left it in the Lord's hands. After my quick prayer, I responded to the king. I explained why I was sad. Jerusalem was a destroyed and unhappy city. The king's response was not, "Cut off his head," but, "What can I do to help?" He knew that 4 months of prayer had been answered. I said, "If it pleases the king, and if his servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city in Judah where my ancestors are buried so that I may rebuild it." Then the king, with the queen sitting next to him, asked me, "How long will your trip be and when will you return?" The king was happy to send me. Oh, what an honor! I had a plan. The 4 months in prayer were not just spent talking to God. I immediately set a time and also asked, "If it pleases the king, I can have letters for the governors of Trans-Euphrates to grant me safe passage until I reach Judah, and also a letter to Asaph, guardian of the royal park, to give me wood to make beams for the gates of the citadel, next to the temple, and for the wall of the city, and for the residence I will occupy." He knew he would need letters of safe passage from the king. I knew what kind of materials would be needed. He also knew what work needed to be done. The gates of the citadel, the city wall, the house I will occupy. He didn't need time to make more plans. The 4 months were enough. The king granted my requests. The gentle hand of my God was clearly upon me, for this could only be the power of the Lord at work. Everything was now ready to go. After that, I traveled to the governors of the Trans-Euphrates region to deliver the king's letters to them. The king also sent officers and knights of the army with me. Everything was prepared. He also had a substantial supply of wood from the king's forest. Truly, the king of Persia answered my call. However, this was also the beginning of enormous difficulties that had the potential to ruin everything. At the governor's station, I met these 2 enemies of Jerusalem and anyone who cared about the well-being of the city, Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite. They were extremely upset by the fact that someone had come to take care of the children of Israel and see how they were doing. As long as Jerusalem was weak and vulnerable, these 2 didn't care. Even if the temple was there and worship was held, that was fine, as long as God's people were strong, secure, and stress-free. But that didn't stop me from going to Jerusalem. This opposition came not in the heart, not in the vision phase, not in the prayer phase, not in the planning phase, but when progress began. I went to Jerusalem with a big dream, a lot of hope, a lot of prayer, and a lot of help from the king. People would have noticed when I arrived in Jerusalem with a military guard and wood from the king's forest of Persia. But I said nothing about my task until the time came. After 3 days in Jerusalem, I went out with some other people in the middle of the night. I was here. For the first time, I was home. At night I went out through the valley gate, examining the walls of Jerusalem, which had been demolished, and its gates, which had been destroyed by fire. He knew he couldn't start making the walls until he saw how bad things were. I could have thought of all the good things about Jerusalem. We were forced to leave Judah, but now we were back there. They had built the temple. There were sacrifices and worship. Although progress was slow, it was happening. There was a lot to be grateful for in Jerusalem, but sometimes you have to look at what's wrong, which is what I did. The officers did not know where he had gone or what he was doing, because he had not yet said anything to the people there, to the priests, nobles, officials, or anyone else who was going to do the job. The people and leaders of Jerusalem didn't just sit back and wait for a hero to come and rebuild their walls. They had probably accepted that it was impossible. It seemed like no one could fix a 100-year-old problem. Years ago, when someone tried, the enemies just stopped them, so they lived with it. So I told them, look at the problem we're in. Jerusalem is in ruins and its gates have been burned. Come, let's rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be a disgrace. Now, when I arrived and explained the vision for rebuilding the walls to the city leaders, there was tremendous importance attached to the meeting. It was impossible for me to complete the task alone, and I would have been in trouble if the leaders did not support me. I told them about my God's kind hand on me and what the king had told me. I assured the leaders that this was not my project, it was God's project. They responded, let's start rebuilding. So they began this good work, but when Sanballat, the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite official and Geshem the Arab found out, they laughed at us and despised us, saying, what is this you are doing? Are they going to rebel against the king? They mocked and ridiculed us. Tobias was a powerful figure due to his connections with the high priest family and his ability to request assistance from the priests. The name Tobit means Jehovah is good, a strange name for a man who was an opponent of God's work. Through his marriages, Sanballat was connected to priestly families. These men were my brothers and the citizens of Jerusalem. We might have thought they would support my work, but they didn't. Opposition is always difficult, but when brothers disagree with you, it feels like you've been betrayed on top of everything else. Sanballat and Tobias used contempt in their attack. They wanted me to feel ridiculed, stupid, and foolish. They showed their contempt and despised us with a mocking tone. They asked me, are they going to rebel against the king? This question shows that both Sanballat and Tobiah did not think much about the power of God. The fact that they asked that question showed that they thought the king of Persia was the most powerful person on earth. First, they were completely ignorant. They had no idea what they were talking about. Although they did not know it, the king had given his blessing. The king helped with the work. Secondly, they didn't care how much power God had. Even if the king of Persia was against this work, it did not matter because the God of heaven and earth was in favor. I didn't care about the comments, so I told them, the God of heaven will give us success. We, your servants, will begin to rebuild. But as for you, you have no share in Jerusalem, no historical claim or right over it. We build, we build, we build. The high priest and his fellow priests began to work and rebuilt the sheep gate. Those were the gates of the wall. The gates were the most important entry and exit points of the city, and the places most likely to suffer an enemy attack. Therefore, work began at each gate and expanded from there. Then we consecrate them. This is done to show that something is special and set apart for the glory and care of God. Those city gates were made especially for God. The priest knew that God wanted everything to be separated for him alone. This included the city walls and gates. Each man's job was important. Each person or family received individual responsibility for their work. Mostly people joined in, but not everyone did. These lords of the city of Tekoa thought they were better than hard work, so they did not join, they did not submit, they did not bow to what the Lord wanted them to do. The real issue was submission. The fish gate was repaired by men of different professions, not by professional builders. They didn't have the skills to do that kind of work. It seemed like they had a good reason for not doing anything, but they got involved and did the work anyway. Even though many people did not think they were ready or capable, they built walls around Jerusalem. They put up its beams and placed its doors with their bolts and locks. I held each man accountable for the work he did. Each man was in charge of a certain part of the wall, and it was known that he was responsible for it. No one wanted people to think they were bad at working for God. We got people from high and low positions to work together. The man who lived in a single room, the leaders and the high priest worked together. I didn't care if people tried new things. I also told people to start with their own homes, and I didn't push people away because they had sinned or lied in the past. When Sanballat found out that we were repairing the wall, he was offended and angry. He mocked us, and in front of his companions and the army of Samaria asked, "What are these weak people doing? Will they restore the wall? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they finish in one day? Can they bring the stones back to life from those piles of burnt rubble as they are?" Tobiah, the Ammonite who was next to him, spoke and said, "What they are building, even a fox climbing on it would tear down their stone wall." After the work had already begun, they became indignant and quite agitated about the situation. Like most attempts to make you feel bad, the enemy's words contained a grain of truth. As builders, we wouldn't finish in a day. We didn't have the best tools to use. I didn't argue. I didn't form a committee. I didn't even deal directly with the two enemies. Instead, I took it to God in prayer. I prayed, "Hear us, O God, for we are despised. Turn their insults on their own heads. Deliver them as plunder in a land of captivity. Do not cover their guilt or erase their sins from your sight, for they have thrown insults in the faces of the builders." Then we rebuilt the wall until its full height was reached, because the people worked with all their hearts. But Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the people of Ashdod were very angry when they heard that the repairs to the walls of Jerusalem had begun and that the breaches were being closed. They all planned together to come and fight against Jerusalem and cause trouble. Now, instead of just complaining or mocking me, they made threats and planned violence. This was serious. The wall was built to protect against violent attacks, but now it seemed that the wall itself could provoke an attack. People might have become scared and worried that all their hard work might be for nothing. They wanted to create confusion among God's people. Confused people never move forward and accomplish the work of God. They are usually confused because they are distracted by the wiles of their enemies instead of focusing on God and His promises. However, we prayed to our God, and because of them we set up a guard against them day and night. We would not stop praying to God for anything. We could have given up, thinking that God was not answering our prayers because the attacks continued to happen. But we had more faith in God than that. I was determined not to let the safety of daylight or the drowsiness of night keep me from working. This sent a powerful message. He sent a message to God's people saying, "We are committed, This will work because God is with us and will help us overcome all problems. He sent a message to the enemies that they would not be victorious in their endeavors. The work that God began cannot be stopped, it is already underway. It doesn't matter if that means sleepless nights or grueling days, because we're willing to do whatever it takes to get the job done. He sent a message to God. We trust in you, and our faith is a living faith, a faith of actions, not just words. We love and trust you, Lord. On the other hand, the difficulties did not stop. In addition to the difficulties that came from outside, there were also difficulties that came from within. Judah said, "The strength of the workers is failing and there is so much rubble that we cannot build the wall." Judah had to be the tribe with the most strength and courage. It was the tribe that produced powerful kings. The fact that this word originated from the tribe of Judah served as both a unique obstacle and a source of discouragement. The middle ground is a dangerous place. There is still much to do, but fatigue sets in because so much has already been done. The task is not finished yet. Rebuilding the walls required not only construction, but also cleaning and removing the debris that accumulated during the process. The ruins of the walls, lying in ruins for 100 years, had become a collection point for all types of debris. Cleaning up the debris was not an option, it had to be done. The destroyed parts of the wall and the accumulated rubble had to be removed so that the walls could be rebuilt on their foundations. The walls would not hold if that were not done, and our adversary said, "They will not know or see anything until we go into their midst and kill them and stop the work." Things were already bad and the discouraged workers felt like giving up. Now, the enemy was making plans to attack the workers who were rebuilding the walls. The enemies knew that now the only way to make them stop serving God and doing His work was to kill them. People who lived near us came and told us about the evil plan. God's enemies did everything they could, but God was always in control. The enemies did not know that loyal people were listening to what they were planning. Those who heard the plan did not have enough discernment to know what to do. They were scared, and I think it bothered them that I wasn't scared too. I positioned some people behind the lowest points of the wall in the exposed places, assigning them by families with their swords, spears, and bows. After taking a look at everything, I got up and said to the lords, officers, and the rest of the people, "Don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and fearsome, and fight for your families, your sons and daughters, your wives and your homes." I ordered his armor to be brought. It was time to get serious, to put on the full armor and prepare to fight with all the resources at our disposal. I looked at the big picture. Even though the task was difficult, there was no reason to be afraid. I made sure they didn't forget why they were fighting. When our enemies heard that we were aware of their plot and that God had thwarted it, we all returned to the wall, each one to his work. As soon as the adversaries noticed the defenses, they began to retreat. They did not want to fight, as they were sure that they would lose. The enemies wanted God's people to give them an easy victory by not watching and being prepared. From that day on, half of my men did the job and the other half were equipped with swords, shields, bows, and armor. The officers stayed behind the people of Judah who were building the wall. People carrying supplies did their jobs with one hand while holding a gun in the other. After that, I addressed the nobles, officials, and the rest of the people, saying the work is extensive and scattered, and we are widely separated along the wall. Wherever you hear the sound of the trumpet, join us there. Our God will fight for us. Furthermore, I instructed them, have each man and his helper stay inside Jerusalem at night, so that they can serve us as guards at night and as workers during the day. Neither I, nor my brothers, nor my men, nor the guards with me, take off our clothes. Each one had his weapon, even when he went to fetch water, but then the men and their wives raised a great clamor. Some were saying, "We and our sons and daughters are numerous. To eat and stay alive we must get grains. Others said, we are mortgaging our fields, our vineyards and our houses to get grain during the famine. We had to borrow money to pay the king's taxes on our fields and vineyards. My story is not about money. However, financial problems directly affected the reconstruction work. People had financial problems because they were working hard on the walls and not spending as much time providing for their families' needs. People were having financial problems because there was a famine, which made food more expensive. And it was so expensive that some mortgaged their properties to provide food. People were having financial problems because the government kept taxing them even though they weren't working as much and the cost of living was rising. Those taxes were not the fault of those who harmed them. Neither I nor the people acted as if these taxes were unfair. However, they were still a burden. People were having a hard time surviving. Since the loans they had made to survive had interest, and some of them could not pay. As a result, some people were forced to hand over their children to moneylenders to work as servants to pay off the debt. The rich were using the crisis as an opportunity to make money from the less fortunate, charging interest rates of 12% a year. If I and my people did not find a way to do what God wanted us to do regarding our money and financial problems, God's work would have stopped without a single enemy shooting an arrow. So I called a great assembly to deal with them and said, as far as we can, we have bought back our Jewish brothers, who had been sold to the Gentiles. Now you are selling your own people, only to be sold back to us. They were silent, because they could find nothing to say. My companions and I started lending money and grain to people. And I told the nobles to stop charging interest. I instructed them to return their fields, vineyards, olive groves and houses, and the interest they were collecting. They all agreed and said, we will give back and we will not demand anything more from them, we will do as you say. So, I summoned the priests and made the nobles and officials swear to do what they had promised. I also shook the folds of my cloak and said, in this way, may God shake from his house and possessions anyone who does not fulfill this promise. Let such a person be shaken and emptied. At this, the whole assembly said, Amen, and praised the Lord. And the people did as they had promised. My appointment as governor of Judah occurred shortly afterward, although neither I nor my brothers touched the governor's rations. Previous governors had taxed the people heavily, extracting 40 cycles of silver from them, in addition to the usual quotas for food and drink. His assistants also imposed themselves on the people, but out of reverence for God, I did not act that way. Instead, I dedicated myself to work on this wall. All my men were gathered there for work. We did not acquire any land. Furthermore, there were 150 Jews and officers eating at my table. Every day an ox, 6 choice sheep, and some birds were prepared for me, and every 10 days an abundant supply of wine of all kinds. Despite all this, I never made a demand for the food that was supposed to be given to the governor, since the demands that fell on the people were so great. Now, what happened when Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem the Arab and the rest of our enemies heard that he had rebuilt the wall and that there were no more breaches in it, although at that time he had not hung the doors on the gates? Sanballat and Geshem sent me saying, Come, let us meet together in the villages on the Ono plain. But they had plans to hurt me. I was able to see beyond appearances. So I sent messengers to them saying, I'm doing a great work, so I can't come down. Why should work stop while I leave him and come down to you? But they sent me this message 4 times, and I responded the same way. With discernment, not only would I escape his trap, but I would also not be distracted from my work. I was persistent in my discernment. Then Sanballat sent his servant to me as before, for the 5th time, with an open letter. It was written in it, It is reported among the nations, and Geshem says that you and the people plan to rebel. Therefore, according to these rumors, you are rebuilding the wall so that you can be its king. And you have also appointed prophets to proclaim about you in Jerusalem, saying, There is a king in Judah. Now these matters will be reported to the king. Then come and let us consult together. I sent them, saying, Nothing you say is happening. You are making it up in your own heart. Everyone tried to intimidate us, saying, Your hands will weaken in the work, and it will not be finished. Now therefore, O God, strengthen my hands. I didn't put together a detailed defense trying to prove Sanballat wrong point by point. I wouldn't waste my time. You don't satisfy men like Sanballat with facts, explanations, and evidence. He satisfies them by exceeding their demands, and I refuse to do so. Sanballat would not be defeated by being called a liar. He had the insight that the smear strategy was all about fear. And I wouldn't give in to that. No enemy can make us afraid. All they can do is try to make us choose fear. But it is up to us to reject it. However, the assassination attempts did not end. When I entered the house of Shemaiah, who was confined in his house, he said, Let us gather together and seek refuge together in the house of God, inside the temple, and we will close the doors of the temple, for they are coming to kill you, and they will come to kill you at night. But I said, Should a man like me run away in fear and hide? Should someone like me enter the temple to be saved? I will not go. Shemaiah tried to instill fear in me and convince me to disobey God as a result of that fear. The temple was off limits to anyone other than priests, which included me. If I followed Shemaiah's advice, I would be disobeying God and sinning against him. I realized that God had not sent Shemaiah, but that the enemy had commissioned him to prophesy against me. He had been hired to intimidate me, so that I would commit a sin by doing so, and then they would give me a bad name to discredit me. When the news spread that the wall had been completed, the surrounding countries were gripped by fear and lost confidence knowing that this had been built with the help of our God. The time needed to complete the task was surprisingly short. After falling into disuse for more than a century, the walls were rebuilt in just 52 days. Why had the work not been done in the previous 100+ years? It wasn't that anyone saw the problem. It wasn't that the walls were unwanted. The destruction of the walls of Jerusalem was witnessed by many, and everyone knew how that affected the city's residents. But no one ever got past wishing that Jerusalem still had walls. When the wall was finished, the enemies were very discouraged. It is glorious to discourage the enemies of God's people and leave them discouraged for a time. Our enemies were discouraged not only because the wall was finished, but especially because it was evident that God did the work. The strong and confident people of Jerusalem were a testimony to the surrounding nations. However, the nobles of Judah had no problem being friends with such a man, since he had family ties with many in the tribe of Judah. Furthermore, the nobles of Judah sent many letters to Tobiah, our enemy who opposed the wall, and Tobiah's answers kept coming to them. Many in Judah were under oath to him. They continued to tell me about his good deeds and then tell him what I said, and Tobiah sent letters to intimidate me. After the wall was rebuilt and the gates were put in place, the gate guards, the musicians, and the Levites were appointed. The Levites and singers were there to lead the people in worship. The city walls were not rebuilt so that the people of Jerusalem could admire how wonderful they looked. They were rebuilt so that they could worship God even more gloriously and freely than before. I put my brother in charge of Jerusalem, along with Ananias, who was the commander of the citadel, due to the fact that he was an honorable man and feared God more than most people. I told them, the gates of Jerusalem must not be opened until the sun is hot. While the guards are still on duty, order the doors to be closed and secured. Also appoint the residents of Jerusalem as guards, some at their posts and others near their own homes. A tremendous victory had been achieved. The walls were rebuilt. However, the walls would not protect themselves. There had to be guards who did their job well, and the walls had to be watched. The doors had to be opened late and closed early, because security was very important. Now, the city was large and open, but there were not many people living there, and the houses had not been rebuilt. Then my God told me to gather the nobles, leaders, and the people, so that their genealogical records could be written. He wanted Jerusalem to grow and prosper. But before that could happen, he needed to know who was already there. Just as when I surveyed the fallen walls, with all these events, something great happened. There was a revival. The entire town gathered as one man in the open square in front of the gate of the waters. They told Ezra, the scribe, to bring the book of the law of Moses that the Lord had commanded Israel. Ezra was responsible for rebuilding the temple and bringing God's people back to worship. I simply continued the work that Ezra had begun. Then Ezra the priest brought the law before the assembly of men and women and all who could hear with understanding on the first day of the 7th month. He read from it in the open square, in front of the water gate, from morning until noon before the men and women and those who could understand, and the ears of all the people were attentive to the book of the law. The book of the law of Moses refers to the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. This was Israel's instruction manual on how to walk before God. And I, the governor, Ezra, the priest and scribe, and the Levites who taught the people, said to all the people, "This day is holy to the Lord your God, do not weep or lament." For all the people wept when they heard the words of the law. Then they said to them, "Go, eat what is fatty and drink what is sweet, and send portions to those for whom nothing has been prepared, for this day is holy to our Lord. Do not be sad, for the joy of the Lord is your strength." Then the Levites calmed all the people, saying, "Be calm, for the day is holy, do not be sad." I was not only concerned with the external reconstruction of Jerusalem, but I was also dedicated to the religious reform of Judah. I saw a need, I stood up, I had a clearer vision of what I wanted to do. I made a plan and called on other people to join my cause. I stand out as a testimony of fidelity and perseverance. I lived far from home, but I never stopped hoping that I could return. I spent most of my life in exile, in a country where people did not believe in God, but I never stopped believing in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I was a prayer warrior who took everything to God in prayer and prayed for my people. I was honored for my hard work and persistence. I cared so much about my people that I never stopped waiting for their return, not only to our country, but to the God who first called our ancestor Abraham from the same area and made an alliance with him, one that he believed would last forever. My name is Nehemiah, and this is my story.